furry animals. Myers was a terrifying screen presence, exactly because we know little about him, so turning him into just another disturbed serial killer seemed like a betrayal of everything that made him scary in the first place. Combine this with the headache-inducing shaky camera work, again a long way away from Carpenter's smooth, composed and beautifully lit original, and you have a rather pointless exercise, no better than the terrible endless sequels. With this in mind, it seemed like a perfect opportunity to take a look back at the origins of the franchise and the power of John Carpenter's original vision. Real Report spoke to Stefan Hutchinson, director and writer of new documentary Halloween 25 Years of Terror, about the film, its sequels, and the enduring appeal of Michael Myers.
I think it's one of the classic horror films that actually works because of its artistic stance. Halloween's very much about the style, it's very much about what you don't see. It's, you know, a triumph of minimalism. As well as that, if you look at the influence it's had, you know, so many crappy imitators as a result of it, where they didn't understand why Halloween worked. They went, oh, it's a man in a mask, you know, some death, some breasts. Those were all just the dressing on something else, I think.
We had a company called Compass International Pictures, and we were distributors of low-budget pictures. The problem was that we couldn't find any low-budget pictures to distribute. It became apparent that the only way we could make any money is if we started to make some pictures.
I was doing a movie, Line of the Desert, a big epic. We're spending $300,000 a day. They came, they said the whole movie is $300,000. He said, the babysitter to be killed by the boogeyman. Not the boogeyman that attracted me, the babysitter. Because every kid in America knows what a babysitter is. They can relate to a babysitter.
There's a lot of different aspects of the actual style in there. The use of suggestion with the villain. You never get a clear representation of him. Even the mask, it's the hint of a person rather than a real person. The whole thing is a suggestion of an entity. He's created by the camera, by the editing. All these things create him, and it's almost like if you're a character in Halloween, you're battling the forces of cinema to survive. He's quite literally death throughout the whole thing, by virtue of the way he's created metaphorically. There's nothing specific about the villain, and the style creates that. It's very expressionist as well. You've got the high contrast, the shadows, the normal look of suburbia, but as soon as night falls, everything becomes silhouettes. You know very little when the film starts. You're seeing in the camera, but you know you're seeing from a point of view because you hear the breathing. We don't know who this person is, but just by the voyeuristic nature of the camera, we know the person is clearly a menace. It's not someone who's going to go in there and do a cha-cha. It's someone who's got very much a devious intent, and that's clarified when they get the knife. We see the whole tracking shot, and you're seeing it from the point of view of the aggressor. Kills his sister after that very, very specific look sideways to the bed, which is the whole, I think, there's a little sexual hint in Halloween, but not overly stated. Other films state it too far. But it's very subtly, looks at the bed, kills sister, runs out of the house. Then the camera flips around. We're seeing the point of view, and it's a kid. And it just, a 6-year-old boy, and it just completely throws you for a loop. And from that point of view, you don't really, know where you're going to stand throughout the rest of the film. It's sort of played with your expectations and just spat in your face. I think the thing about the shape that keeps him interesting, and what he's been constantly losing since that first film, is the mystique. I mean, the fact that he's called The Shape. If you look at the scripts to the sequels, mostly he's referred to as Michael Myers. I mean, I know for some people they like answers, and I think even more so now with the internet, with DVDs where they tell you behind the scenes how things were done, with message boards where people analyse things to death, there's this real desire to know. And if you don't let people know, it keeps him fresh, it keeps him interesting, it keeps him mysterious, and it keeps him dangerous. And the more you tell him, the more you humanise him, I think you're going very, very far away from what made that original film so successful and what makes Michael Myers an actual icon.
He suggested we put it on Halloween night, but play the whole thing on Halloween night, and call the movie Halloween, because he felt it was a holiday that everybody could identify with, and it hadn't really been done. And since I needed a job and I wanted to do that kind of thing, I said, sure, I'll do it. And as long as I can have complete creative control and I get my name above the title, then we'll do it.
I'd say just about every film from the early 80s, other than your sort of supernatural ones, was quite clearly influenced by Halloween. Now, Halloween is credited for starting the slasher boom, but there's films that came before that. We've got Black Christmas is the obvious one, and there's a lot of other films, Twitch the Death Nerve, all these other films that inspire it. So I think the reason Halloween's credited with that is because it was the first one to make a lot of money on no money. So whilst Halloween may not have been the first, it's the first one that opened the floodgates. And the imitators sort of would look at the basic elements. I mean, if you look at Friday the 13th, I actually quite like Friday the 13th. I think it's different enough to be a good film. It's got its own little atmosphere that's quite unique for the first 4 of those. But Victor Miller, who wrote it, says the first thing he did when writing Friday the 13th was watch Halloween and make a note of the key beats. You can see it in the whole sort of, you know, films like The Burning. I know these are very obvious examples, but there's a whole sort of, the way the villain is, you know, it's the killer shark really, it's the killer shark personified in a person. I don't think there's as much of an influence on films like Elm Street as people say there are. I think Elm Street's got its own agenda, very much so. But what Halloween did do, I think it's important in this sense, is it created the first replacement for the Universal monsters. Because the original, you know, the characters that would appear, you had the creature from the Black Lagoon, you had Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, they're all archetypes who would come back and still come back to this day. Whereas when Halloween appeared with Michael Myers, you've got Michael, Jason, Freddy, and he's the first one of the icons. You could say Leatherface, but I think Leatherface only actually became an icon in the 80s with Texas Chainsaw 2, because then he was bundled into the slasher genre. But that's what happened there, the monsters for that generation. And since then, we've not really had any, because the best monsters happen by accident. And a lot of the monsters that have tried to copy Halloween have deliberately tried to create a monster. And if you do that, it works for one film. You can't create a franchise. I think franchises happen by accidents. Possibly the nearest thing we've got now is Jigsaw, because that's a film series that very much does its own thing. And I think that's what will happen in future. If people try and imitate slasher icons, it's not going to work.
2003 marked the silver anniversary of the franchise, and even though the studio had nothing planned, the fans did. To celebrate 25 years of Halloween films, a convention was held in South Pasadena, the shooting location of the original film. Halloween Returns to Haddonfield gathered together cast and crew from the whole series and almost 3,000 fans from around the world. The internet fan base was now of a size where it could support such an event with ease, and ironically, it was Michael's internet adventures in Halloween Resurrection that accidentally started the ball rolling.
There's a very fundamental problem with the horror genre, which makes it different to other genres. Any genre at any given time, you've got a variety of films within it. The horror genre, on the other hand, is very cannibalistic. It has one hit film, and for the next 3 years, the genre will be imitating it. And I think that's really unhealthy. I think it stunts a development and a progression within the genre, because as soon as a film hits, studios invest imitating this film rather than trying to create something new and build the genre. And I think at the moment, with Saw being very successful, we've got a whole host of substandard movies that take what worked in Saw, and the only way they can sort of build upon that is by going to a more extreme level. It's the same with Halloween. When they imitated that, they took the basic concept and just built on it without understanding why it worked. And I think we have the same with the Saw films. I mean, you know, the Saw films are not necessarily my favourite by any means, but they were first. They were first, and when they, you know, if anything, you could say Seven influenced Saw, I guess. But all the films that come after only build upon that and give in to the things that people say that are negative about the genre. You know, horror will always come for criticism. It'll always be blamed for the sins of the world, you know, because people don't want to take any responsibility. People will always look for a scapegoat, and horror, unfortunately, a lot of the time plays up to that. It plays up to that, and I think that's a shame, because we can do better. I think that a very good horror film is life-affirming. You go, you see the death and destruction, and you see absolute mayhem that there's no way you'd want to experience in real life on any level whatsoever. You know, in a film, it's a safe environment for you to sort of play out the things that would bother you. When you see people die and get murdered in whatever ways, and just the sense of loss, you have to be glad for everything you have. And we will always, in the same way that we're fascinated by our own nightmares, we'll always go back to see them played out and try and understand them ourselves, and again, experience things that we'd be too scared to experience in the real world, thankfully.